first horror related experience, maybe first horror movie you ever saw, scary movie? Actually, you know what? It doesn't even have to be uh, horror per se, because I find a lot of times people say things, like Gremlins or E.T. or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I definitely was a kind of a horror fan. I think as a kid, I definitely was like, um, I think actually probably the first things were like reading Goosebumps, and
Nice.
then because that was in like the school library, and then probably like Goosebumps on TV and Are You Afraid of the Dark? I think those were like the gateway. And then I think the first things that were really scary, we watched. I was thinking about this recently actually because somebody else was asking me, and it was like there was a few kind of in quick succession, but I think it was like kind of The Sixth Sense, Blair Project, The Omen were kind of the first ones I remember watching when I was kind of young and still scared of things, probably.
You know what? The Sixth Sense, I think, is one actually that's like underrated for that. I remember being, I think, is it the scene where he gets inside of his little fort tent thing?
Yeah.
That used to scare the living shit out of me.
Yeah, it's a big jump scare moment. It's like because I was rewatching it for something recently, and yeah, it's really effective. The scares are pretty like good. Do you know what I mean? And like as well as being quite like an emotional movie towards the end, but they do like when the scares are there, they're like or like when he climbs into that kind of cubby hole at the birthday
Oh yeah,
party, and then they like he comes out with all the scratches, and you don't see what happens, but it's like really disturbing, and because you're like, who is that ghost in there? Like, what's going on with that? It's like so scary.
yes.
Um, yeah, I remember we watched. I was at a sleepover with a bunch of other girls, and we watched Sixth Sense 3 times in a row.
Jesus, glutton for punishment.
Yeah, I think because one girl came late, so we like watched it with her, but then like all of us wanted to watch it a third time because we were like so obsessed with just like how scary some of the bits were in it. So we watched it a third time.
That's them two scenes actually are some that stand out for me. Along with, and I was actually glad to hear in recent years that a lot of people share this. From the movie Signs, the scene where he's watching the news and that like alien thing passes by the
Yes,
alleyway.
yeah, that is terrifying. I actually rewatched Signs as well recently because I think it's because my girlfriend hadn't seen Sixth Sense or Signs, and I was like, oh my god, you have to watch them if you haven't seen them. When she was a kid, she wasn't really allowed to watch kind of scary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And we rewatched Signs, and those bits are really scary. There is some like that shot of the alien walking. It like still gets me. It's like
Yeah, it's one of
something
those like
very
gives you goosebumps.
yeah. It's really effective. Yeah, it's really good.
Is your girlfriend a fan of horror, or is it just kind of a thing where they
No,
kind of no?
yeah, well when we've been going out for like almost 7 years now, and at the start of that 7 years, she definitely would be like a person who'd be like, I don't watch horror movies, but
Mm.
obviously when you're going out with a horror filmmaker, you kind of have to watch a few eventually.
Yeah,
So, but she kind of, I think it kind of made her realize that like you have obviously the jump scare, like Conjuring style world of horror, but then, we watched a lot of movies that she hadn't seen, like The Shining or Rosemary's Baby, and like, you know, that kind of realm of horror that's like a bit more weight to it, I suppose, like of
yeah.
like kind of that 70s era. And, she loves lots of those movies and like really enjoys them. So yeah, it's more the kind of like gratuitous jump scare or like gory violence she's not a fan of. Yeah.
And for you, like growing up, you're seeing things like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark and different things like that. Were you instantly then, I guess, attracted to the genre, or was it kind of more of like a? Because there seems to be like two different styles. Some people it kind of seems still taboo and they kind of want to see it but they don't, and then other people just dive right in.
Yeah, I definitely was like a dive right in kind of person. I think I loved like anything kind of spooky or scary at all. Like Halloween was like my favorite time of year, and like anything that had like a monster on it, even those like, I don't know, I had the like those, you know, those kind of like encyclopedia books that are
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, just like about random topics. Like the one about ghosts and like skeletons, I like read obsessively like every part of it. And like there was one book I had that just had a very short, like 3 pages about like hauntings and stuff, and there was like paragraphs on poltergeists and things like that, and I just like would obsessively read them like all the time. So I think I was really hungry for like things that would scare me, which was kind of funny because I was a very like scaredy cat kind of kid in a way as well. Like then I wouldn't sleep and like would be terrified all night because I had like thought too much about poltergeists. um, but I was still like, it didn't really deter me. I think I just like wanted to push through the idea of like being scared of stuff. I was like, no, I want more scary stuff. So then yeah, I kind of just started getting more and more all the time. So like yeah, then more films that were kind of scarier, books that were scarier. I started reading kind of Stephen King when I was probably about like 11. So then that kind of, yeah, just all went from there.
It's funny to hear you say that about being like a scaredy cat, because I would probably consider myself, and the amount of people I've met and talked to that are somewhat the same, where it's like they're into this so much, but at the same time, maybe even still are kind of a little bit of a scaredy cat with stuff. Like I used to go to Orlando every year to do Halloween Horror Nights, and
Yeah.
obviously like it's just like jump scares and it's just like your kind of haunted house thing, but like I would obsess over this for like 6 8 months beforehand and try and find out what they were going to announce and what it was going to be about and all this stuff. And then I would get there, like in that first moment where you're about to walk into the soundstage, I'd just be like, oh God, why am I doing this? I don't even like
Yeah.
this feeling.
Yeah, I think like I find those really scary. Those kind of like I can watch any horror movie and not be scared at
Mm-hmm.
all. But I think yeah, those kind of haunted house things still scare the shit out of me all the time. I think it's just like yeah, that idea of like somebody's gonna jump out at you. It's like yeah, pretty scary.
Like I would even go as far as like I'll end up doing them because like at the end I do ultimately love them, but I still have a really strange fear of what do you call them fun house, is it?
Yes,
You know those
yeah,
like
actually, I totally share that fear because I think when so you know the way like Funderland comes to
mm-hmm.
Dublin and like at Christmas, so like it's our my dad's side of the family, it's their kind of tradition to always go, and we used to be brought when we were kids, like from when I kind of as far back as I remember, like,
Yeah.
um, but my auntie was kind of young, and she used to always kind of bring us on like there used to be a really weird thing at Funderland where like you went in and a man just kind of chased you around. Or like the train, the ghost train,
Yeah.
the staff used to just like go in and scare people as well as the stuff that like did that. And then the fun house, I remember like like my auntie like shoving me onto the fun house when I was probably like 5, and then the air spraying at you, and like
Oh
I
yeah.
remember like running into a mirror, and like the whole thing was like so hectic. I was just like terrified. So yeah, I get what you mean.
I don't know, and like I don't know what that is. Like I have a 7-year-old boy, and I think it was last year we were somewhere and they had a fun house, and I couldn't bring myself to get on it. I was like, I can't go in there. And exactly what you said, I can still vividly remember the air shooting up, and I remember running, and then I hit a mirror, but it turned out it wasn't actually a mirror. It was like this weird two-way thing, and it lit up, and it was a clown.
Oh
Now it
god.
was supposed to be like it wasn't a scary clown, but like I still have that in my mind, and like that feeling of like you said, like it's like sensory overload. There's just like noise everywhere and stuff everywhere, and I
Yeah,
hate
and the
it.
floor starts moving when you think you're safe, and then you have to keep moving, and it's just like yeah, I remember that was like extremely frightening.
Um, do you have any comfort horror movies, like films you find yourself maybe you go back to quite regular or more often than others?
Yeah, there would probably be a good few, and like probably at different times, like it would change. I think like during COVID, um, I watched the Scream all the Scream movies again. And what else? Kind of like, yeah, you just throw on things that are kind of really familiar, like Halloween, or like the
Mm-hmm.
ones that are kind of more campy that you just like
Yeah.
you can chuck it on, and like you don't really need to be kind of like paying attention too much. And then it's like, that kind of more teen horror, I suppose, that kind of slasher stuff. Like, even I Know What You Did Last Summer, stuff like that, where you're just like, this is just like popcorn for my brain that I can just like forget everything else. There's no like, I think like, films like Midsummer, or like
Mm-hmm.
Hereditary, where it's more like trauma is like there. Those ones I'm like, no, 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 more like just like teenagers running around from a killer that's like
Yeah.
chasing them. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's easy to watch. Easy, yeah, it's just fun.
I totally get that. Is that something that would interest you to make?
Like a slasher style
Yeah, like come up with like
movie.
maybe your own killer and backstory or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I loved, like, I think a lot of those, I think when I was a teenager, that was kind of one of the first realms of like subgenres of horror that like you would watch at sleepovers, because they're more
Mm-hmm.
accessible to like, a bunch of teen girls watching like a movie. So like Urban Legend or like
Yeah, yeah.
Valentine, these kind of like really campy things. So I do love them, and I have such a kind of joy watching them. But I do think, like, to do a modern slasher is very hard. Like, I've watched a lot recently, and I even got sent some scripts for slashers to direct, like, to read, to direct. And it is like, to make them kind of fresh and interesting is really difficult, I think. So it's like you'd have to really find the right way in, and find that, yeah, that iconic killer, iconic kind of
Mm-hmm.
bad guy that, like, a Freddy Krueger or a Michael Myers that like stand the test of time. I think, because it's hard to do that. I think it's like, especially now, there's just like so much content. It's just like hard to break through it in that way.
Yeah, and I feel like it's one of those subgenres as well that because the slashers we all know and think of are so well established and like they're in the zeitgeist now, that when someone tries to bring a new one in, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, but it's not Freddy, or it's not Michael, or it's not Jason, or it's not Leatherface. I mean, I feel like even
Yeah,
Leatherface has kind of had that fate in a way. He always seems to get the shit end of the stick.
yeah, I know. I think, well, I just think like the first Texas Chainsaw is so visceral, and like has such a kind of a standout style, that, and like, you can like smell everything like rotting in the gaff, and like it's
Mm-hmm.
just so kind of hot, and like you can really feel it. And I think that's obviously down to like how they filmed it was so low budget that like there was literal like rotting flesh hanging around the house and stuff. So I think like you can't, I think Leatherface is hard to do again, because what makes the first one so appealing is just how kind of raw it is, and I don't think you can kind
Yeah.
of recreate that in a kind of a studio, like, everybody's beautiful and like everything looks really polished kind of thing. It's like has to be kind of really dirty and gross.
And so, at what point for you then did things switch from, obviously you said, if you were staying in somebody's house, you would try and get movies and watch movies and see this stuff. At what point in your life then did it switch from that to something that you considered like, this is something I'd actually like to do as a career?
Yeah, I think, well, I really loved films. Like, I watched tons and tons of movies in general, and then horror was just kind of my favorite to watch, I think, because it was one you could watch with friends and like have fun kind of watching,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like kind of like going on a thrill ride, like at a thing you kind of felt excited about it. So that's why I think the genre just like stayed really in my mind as something that I loved so much. But I think it was probably, I had saved up my communion money and confirmation money to buy like a high eight camera, a little high
Mm-hmm.
eight camera, when I was like 11. And then I started making little like horror movies with my friends on that. And that was kind of just for fun as well. But then I think I probably started reading Stephen King, and I read it when I was like 13, 14, probably. And I think I remember reading it and being like, oh my God, I'd love to, because I had seen like Tim Curry one. But I was like, there needs to be like a really good adaptation of this book, like a really like brilliant one that like captures everything, because like it's such a tome of a book. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much in it, so it's really hard to kind of like adapt it. Like I got that in my head when I was like 14. I was like, I will make an It remake someday. And then like a few years ago when they were like, there's an It movie coming out, I was like, damn it. Yeah, so I
That's a
think,
good goal to
yeah.
have.
Yeah, maybe when I'm like in like 20 years, then enough time will have passed. I can do my It, and
Mm-hmm.
then it'll be, yeah, that would be great.
I was going to ask what you would do differently, but that might ruin it.
Well, yeah, I think I think it's a really hard book to adapt because there's just so much in it. Like there's just so much stuff. I think probably just I think what makes Stephen King so good is that when you're reading it, it feels really down to earth until the fantastic elements come into it. And then I think that's what appealed to me when I was younger, because it felt really real when you're reading it. Because you're like, they said it, he sets it up so much in a way that you kind of are like, oh yeah, this is a small town, and like these teens are doing this, and then this happens. And I think probably I just do it more down to earth, in like probably a little bit less I feel like the new one, I really liked the new It's. I thought they were really good, and they
Mm-hmm.
did a really good stab at like trying to capture the book. I think they did it pretty well for the most part, but I think it did feel a little bit Disney-fied, or like a little bit um kind of more fantasy. Like I don't know, some of the kind of visual elements of it I felt like weren't scary enough. I was like, but I know they were probably trying to appeal to like a younger audience as well, to get the kind of young preteens to go and that kind of thing. So they couldn't make it too kind of frightening.
Yeah, I definitely got that vibe that it was like, I guess teetering between like, and I always refer to it as like the Stranger Things vibe or whatever, but like
Yeah.
they were trying to like appeal to everybody.
Yeah, which I get. And like when you're making a giant big studio movie like that, and a horror movie, like I'm one to test, like I think having accessible horror movies that younger people can go to is really important, because it like fosters a kind of a love of the genre. And like if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have that, like if all the kids are just watching like Marvel and nothing that ever is scary, that's probably a bad thing. I think probably you
Yeah,
need to be exposed to some scary stuff when you're younger to kind of I think it just helps with life maybe in general. But so I think, yeah, having stuff that is accessible for a younger audience is really important. But I would maybe do yeah, a scarier It, I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
It's mad actually now that you bring that up and I think about it, that uh, how how popular those two movies made Pennywise and the whole character again. Like, um, I worked somewhere as a manager for a lot of years, and I remember when those movies came out, we like kids, and I mean that kids would come in and be like, you have a Pennywise poster, do you have this, do you have that, and it's like, what is going on? Like small kids like wanting to buy it figures and uh, uh, pop figures, T-shirts, and I'm like, that's mad that like it had that kind of scope.
Yeah, and I kind of, I love that. I think that's great because, when you think of when you're a kid, there's like films that like like, for example, I have a little cousin who's like um about 10 now. But when the films came out, like she was saying that like nobody in her class had seen it, but they all knew about it,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
all knew the character, and they kind of had seen the posters or seen it. They watched the trailer at their friend's house, kind of thing, and then it's like becomes this. You build it up in your mind. I think there's definitely films like that when I was young that like you hear about first, and then you
yeah.
build it up in your head as like something that's going to be way scarier even than it is when you actually watch it. So then it like, I think that's such a fun, yeah, I really like that. I think it's great.
I had that with the Blair Witch Project actually, where
Yeah.
I think and like especially obviously the time and then probably even more so. We were probably even further removed over here than in the States. So it was like this weird, like people were like, "Oh, have you heard about it?" And much the same as I even remember when The Ring came out, and like there
Yeah.
was all this, like we were still kind of in that era where people were like, "Oh no, no, that's actually like that's actually based on a real thing. That's real."
Yeah. Well, I think it's like the kids, the rumors go around and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you watch the movie, you will die in 7 days because that's what happens to the people who watch the movie in the movie. And like, I was terrified to watch The Ring. I was like, oh God, this is it. This is it. I'm gonna die.
It's crazy though how
Yeah.
effective some of that stuff was back then.
I know, yeah. And I think it still is definitely, but um I think obviously you can see with it does like still capture the minds like of young kids who like
Mm-hmm.
see something and then they want to know more about it. But I guess maybe there's less of those kind of uh, horror movies in the mainstream now that
Yeah,
have those kind of iconic characters. So you kind of have to seek them out a bit more. So like obviously Disney Plus has the like rule of the land now, so the kids are mainly exposed to all the kind of Marvel stuff predominantly. So you don't have those kind of iconic. Like I remember even when Scream was coming out and like Scream 2.
mm-hmm.
I think when Scream 2 was coming out, I was about like 8 or something. And I remember we were in Belgium. My mom took me to Belgium for a holiday, and we were passing by a cinema, and they didn't have ratings on films there at the time. And I was like, "Please bring me in to see Scream 2." And she was like, "Absolutely not. You're going to be absolutely terrified." And I was like, "Please!" I was like begging her because I had seen Ghostface, and like even kids would
Mm.
wear the costumes at Halloween and stuff, even if you hadn't seen the movie, kind of thing. It was like the kind of look of Ghostface was so iconic that you were like, this must be terrifying, even though I know nothing about what this film is about at all.
I remember being years ago. I think it was in like first year, maybe in school. We went on a school trip to Belgium or somewhere like that, and I remember coming across. They had like a kind of, I suppose, kind of like a Forbidden Planet, but they had like DVDs and stuff at the time. And I remember going in like and looking at the horror section, and then trying to like see was there any way I could like buy and at the time I think the DVDs were like, like 40 quid or something like that for one movie. And
Whoa.
I remember trying to like bring it to the counter and be like, "Hey, I'll get this." And like I could just tell like the guy was looking at me going like, "I've literally just seen you walk in with a teacher and like a bunch of like
Yeah.
13, 14 year olds." He was like, "There's no way you're getting this." And I remember like going back to the lads and stuff and being like, is there any way we can get this? How can I get this? And all, how can I? And they had them in those big like the plastic cases with the security tag and all. So I was like, there's
Yeah,
no way to even like, the lads were like, well, I'll
yeah.
just take it. I'll just walk out the door. And I was like, you can't, we can't do anything. It's just, I remember asking the teacher, I was like, can you please? I was like, I'll text my mom and she'll tell you I'm allowed. And she was like, no, go away.
God, I forgot about that when you would like, yeah, I remember like going into HMV and you'd be trying to buy and being like, no, you can't get it. And you'd be like, damn it. It was like so frustrating. It was like so funny. God, I completely forgot about that.
Um, so when you started to get more serious about this, then so later in life, you went to school for filmmaking.
Yeah, I went to the film school in IDT.
Mm-hmm.
So that at the time that was kind of like one of the only places you could really do film or go to Ballyfermot. Um, and yeah, I got into IDT, so I was delighted with that. So I went straight from school, and then, but in IDT they really kind of turned us away from horror. I think at the time because I went to college when it was 2008, so I think the
Mm-hmm.
kind of horror that was coming out was probably more that kind of torture porn, like Saw,
Yeah, yeah,
like Hostel, all that kind of, and then the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake type stuff. And I think they kind of just were like, this is, you know, horror is not a real genre of film, and you can't, like, you
yeah,
shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. So it really kind of redirected me to kind of um go more into the drama space, I suppose, and pursue that a bit more, which was a shame because it was my passion and what I loved the most was horror, and like even my graduate film in IDT was it was a ghost story. It was about like a girl being haunted by her best friend who had died. But the original script was much more kind of gothic horror, kind of like, that kind of style, turn of the screw kind of vibe. But um the lecturers just were like, no, it needs, like, it needs to be more, lean into the more drama, like the emotion of it all this kind of stuff. So I did it to be more like that, because they told us that, like, to get into film festivals you needed to kind of be more in that prestige place
Mm-hmm.
of like a drama film that people will watch. And it did, it worked. It was then at the Galway Film Festival, and we played a bunch of festivals after that as well. So, at the time it was probably the right thing to do, but yeah, it felt a bit wrong.
And I suppose, because there's so many different opinions about this, is for somebody looking to replicate what you've done, are you an advocate for going to college or going to school for film, or do you think it's just a case of you need to just be out there and create?
Yeah, I think, like, it kind of depends on the person and
Mm-hmm.
what you need out of that time. I think when I was 18 and I finished school, I didn't really have a lot of confidence in like what I really like. I obviously knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I think I didn't have a lot of confidence in that. And I was really young and I really inexperienced and like just lacked life experience. And I think the 4-year course was good to just give me a bit more of a head on my shoulders so that I knew what I was doing. And also there you learned practical skills like editing, which then I did a lot of kind of Nixers editing when I left college for money. So you do kind of learn those skills, and then you meet a lot of peers, which is great because you meet people, like some people I've met in college I still work with now. And like, I think it's a great network in that way to work with people that, DPs or editors or, whoever you might meet while you're in
Mm-hmm.
college, to work with them in the future. Um, so I think for those reasons it's good. In other ways, it's not so good. Like I think we had to do a lot of academic work in that 4-year course. So you did a lot of essays and you had to do a thesis, all that kind of stuff, which, I could kind of push myself to do, but it wasn't kind of my comfort zone at all. So that was, if you're not kind of academically kind of minded person, who the idea of doing like a 10,000 word essay at the end, so like it is terrifying to you, then I would say maybe try a different route. I think like there's definitely now more than when even I went, there's definitely probably more practical courses that you do learn the skills, but it's more just based in the practical and you get to make films and
Mm-hmm.
do it that way. And I think like probably the best experience I got was actually when I left, or when I sometimes during the summer of college I would get jobs on set as like an art department trainee or like a production trainee. And I think going to sets and actually working with companies that were working where was like taught me so much more than when you're in a class talking about it theoretically.
Yeah.
um so that, yeah, I think like there's definitely loads of ways to do it, and I guess it's just what you feel is best for you in a way. Just like kind of figure it out.
And I think when I first like really discovered you would have been when Catcalls went to Shudder.
Ah, yeah.
How did that all come about? The idea, I guess, for the short to start with, and I suppose what was your intention? Was it always to kind of, was it for a certain place you wanted to make it, or was it just a case of just do your work and get it out there?
Well, so kinda as I said, like had done more drama work up
Mm-hmm.
until that point. And I still had such a hunger to do horror, and I think I got to that point where I was like, no, look, I want to make horror feature films. And now I don't have a horror short under my belt to show that I
Mm-hmm.
understand this genre, which I know so well. So I was talking to a producer about it, and she was like, just make a horror short that captures kind of what you want to do or your style. Um, and then I was tossing around ideas and trying to figure out what to do. And then I had this idea of like a kind of a predator becoming prey, and like a woman becoming the predator in a situation with like a kind of a male sexual predator.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then one night I was walking home with my friend, and we were walking home around 11 o'clock from the pub just to our house, which was like a 10-minute walk. And a guy pulled in and asked us for directions, but he was like masturbating in his car when we went up to the car. So we called the police after he drove off, and I had gotten his license plate number. So the police went to his house that night. They told us this when we were giving our statement a few days later, but they went to his house, and when they got there, he was um his wife answered the door, and then he saw the police were at the door, and he burst into tears and like started crying. And I was like, "Oh my god, that's such a weird." That's exactly kind of the thing that I'd been trying to tap with the script, was like this idea of like someone who's so frightening and so kind of predatory, then just becoming such a kind of weak, vulnerable
Yeah.
loser, like like right after. And I was like, this is quite weird, because I was like trying to write the script at the time. So then I was like, okay, maybe this is what the script is. So then I wrote the film as kind of a cathartic way to deal with like the weird thing that had happened. So that was yeah. So the obviously Catcalls is about a man who pulls in to ask these girls for directions, but then he's like exposes himself to them, and then he drives off, and then the girls follow him back to his house, and it turns out they're kind of like the wrong girls to have done this to, because they're actually shape-shifting cat monsters, hence the title Catcalls. So they turn into monsters and they eat him and his wife. Spoiler. But yeah, so it was like, it was a great thing, because I think like it was really fun to make it, and I think it really captured exactly what I wanted to do. And then we were very lucky to get Screen Ireland funding for that one, Focus Shorts funding, which is quite substantial for a short. Like I think it was 40K or something like that, which is a lot for a short film. So a lot of it's at night time, obviously, and we got to light the streets really nicely, and
Mm-hmm.
there was some of like practical effects with the monster, and we got to build those things. And so we were kind of, it was done in like a really high spec for what I wanted to do, which I was, it really kind of captured what I had on the page and in my mind, as because sometimes you obviously when you make things, you have to make a lot of compromises, and then it doesn't quite turn out the way that you wanted it
Mm-hmm.
to in the end. But Catcalls, I think, was one of the things that I've made where I feel like it kind of really got close to what I wanted with it. So yeah, and then it was really kind of successful as a short for me. We played all the big genre festivals like Fantastic Fest and Fantasia and Sitges, and then yeah, Shudder acquired it to put on their platform, which is really cool as well. So it was on there for a while. I think it's gone now, but that was great, because then it's just mad to know like lots of people have seen your short, which
Mm-hmm.
like normally shorts you kind of just expect to just wither away and not that many people see them, except maybe at a film festival. But it was cool, because then it was, you know, you could see that lots of people were watching it and stuff, which was fun.
Because I remember seeing it, and like I absolutely loved it, and I the whole time I was thinking, I was like, I don't like, maybe this is what works for this, but I was like, I want to see more. Like when I really enjoy something like that, and sometimes it being a short format, or even if it's a feature length, and they keep a lot of stuff like kind of obscure and don't really tell you about it. That kind of, I think, makes the audience want more, and they want to know about like, where did these people come from, how did this come to be, blah blah blah. Had you ever had any intention to make that into a feature length, or had you written a story or anything like that?
It's funny you asked that, because actually at the time that I wrote the short film, and the reason, I was saying a producer was like, you should make a short if you want to make a feature. I had a feature idea which was about kind of girls that could turn into these cats. Um and then so Catcalls was almost, not really, but it became its own thing um as the short was made. But I think it was sort of a proof of concept to just show that I could do this, and that's this is what it might look like, or this is what it might be. Um so then that film has been in development since then, which is like 5 years. So I do have a feature which is in the same world as Catcalls. It's a little bit different. It's kind of about it's more of a queer coming of age film now. So it's about a teenage girl who essentially is like dealing with her sexuality as like a
Mm-hmm.
young queer person, and but it's in that world, so it's like in the Catcalls kind of universe. I hate to say that universe thing, but the yeah, so we're open actually. It's kind of the scripts come along leaps and bounds in the past couple of years. Obviously, You Are Not My Mother kind of took a lot of my time over that period, but we're hoping that we can film that one soon. So you won't have to wait long for a Catcalls kind of feature.
There's something actually I wanted to touch on that I think gets underplayed a lot and people don't realize. You know, like you said there, you had this idea and it's kind of been in development for 5 years. How difficult, I suppose, is that? Like, obviously, I'm not sure about for you, but you know, say from my perspective, the audience perspective, you know, you've made this horror short. It goes to all these huge festivals that we all, you know, see on YouTube and TV and all these different places. It's on Shudder, an app, a streaming app, basically made exactly for the horror fan. Um, you know, and things seem to be really going in the direction you want them to go in. And then when you have these projects that, you know, they're 5 6 years in development, is it really hard to not get frustrated, or is it a case of just having multiple irons in the fire?
Yeah, I think you have to learn that um when I first was writing the feature, that the one that's kind of Catcalls inspired, um I kind of had it in my head. I was like, this is going to be my first feature. I only care about this film. I'm working on this all the time. And it became a kind of obsessive thing. And then I started to realize that when you've only made one short film that's in the horror space, you haven't made a feature film before. You're not a very bankable person to give money to make a feature film.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the producers that have that project on their development slate have much bigger things that they're working on, that then you're kind of on the back burner because you have
Yeah.
never made a film before, and you're not the best writer yet either, probably, so the drafts aren't
Mm-hmm.
the most amazing thing you've ever heard either. um so I think, yeah, it takes a while, and then as in that process I realized that, like, okay, maybe this is going to take longer than I thought. So I started, obviously, I think, anyone who's a creative person will always be like, oh, think of an idea and then write it on. Like, I have a folder full of like paragraph long ideas for films that, in some day I might like fish out and be like, okay, let's make this into kind of something longer. Um, but I think, yeah, at that time I kind of was like, okay, I need to just do other things as well. So I started working on other ideas, and then kind of very fortuitously, the POV scheme came along where Screen Ireland were like, we're doing this micro budget feature scheme. Um, the budget's going to be 400K, capped at that. It's aimed at female writer directors, and I had just done Catcall, so I think I was like, the Screen Ireland knew me because I had done that film with
Mm-hmm.
them. So it kind of just was just the perfect thing. And I was like, okay, I know I thought this film was going to be my first feature that I've been working on so much, but maybe it's not, and maybe something else is. And then I had this idea that was like one page, and it was like 2 weeks from the deadline for POV. And I went to the producer that I'd been talking to about it, and she was like, okay, just do a treatment based on that one page idea and we'll submit it and just go for it. She was like, I think it could really work, because it was You Were Not My Mother, what turned out to be You Were Not My Mother, and it was very contained in one house with a small cast, and it could possibly be done on a very small budget. So we just kind of went for it, and then luckily we got that. So then and that was a real fast track system. That wasn't the kind of waiting in development for years. That was like from when we found out we got on the scheme, which was probably late early 2019 maybe, and then we were filming, yeah, early 2019, and then we were filming November 2020, and we probably would have been filming sooner if it wasn't for COVID as well. So
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, so it was kind of a really quick process. It was almost like whiplash compared to like the development process that I had been used to. So that in a way was really good because it didn't really give you time to like second guess things. You were just like, we're just making a film. Let's just make the first feature and do it. And obviously, since doing that, it's become a lot easier because people, I think, once you've made one film, they know, oh, you know how to do this, so you're more. We can trust you with money, and we know that you're not going to just like totally, bankrupt us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and I suppose the reception for the movie has been, from what I've seen anyway, has been like really, really good. Um, how has that felt for you then? I suppose to come, to bring it all full circle. I know obviously, you're only getting started in your mind. I'm sure there's probably a million and one ideas you have and things you want to do, but to to have your first feature like that, and it's made quite a bit of noise, and it's kind of been like I seen it everywhere. Like when it was coming out there, it it just seemed to you couldn't look on anything, well, any of the circles that I'm in, and not see it mentioned. And it was actually a really cool thing as well to see a female Irish filmmaker get that kind of recognition, I suppose. How has it been for you then, like on the back end of that?
Yeah, it's kind of surreal. It's like a bit weird because like obviously, as I said, when we were making it, it was on this really low budget scheme, and like I had never made a film before. A lot of some of the HODs had never made a film before. Like the production designer, she had
Mm-hmm.
never made a feature film, and a few of the others, the editor, all that kind of stuff. So everyone was really like green, and so it was a real kind of, while we were making it, I kind of never thought in my mind like, oh, this will be. I kind of
Mm.
saw it just as like this is me kind of doing my first feature to get to the next thing that I want to do. And like, I don't really foresee it going anywhere massively because it's like, it's so low budget. Um, but then, yeah, we premiered at Midnight Madness in TIFF, which was kind of, only 7 films get chosen for Midnight Madness at TIFF because
Mm-hmm.
the one is played every night, the one night of the week. Um, and so when we got that, we were like stunned. We were just like, "Oh my god, this is crazy!" And then obviously that is huge for the film to start there because that's obviously at the Midnight Madness sections of the big festivals. That's where people look to kind of buy
Yeah.
films and all that kind of stuff. So we made a lot of sales at TIFF, which a big American sale, which was great. So then Magnolia bought the film to distribute in the US, which I think for the horror space, particularly the kind of horror movie that You're Not My Mother is, we knew that kind of the US space would be a place where it would be appreciated because I
Yeah.
think it's just in that kind of style. Um, so yeah, it was kind of wild, and like you kind of go through all these mad things where like I went over to LA for the release of the film there, and like you have people doing calls with you where they're like, "Well, we just got certified fresh, and now we got the critics' pick on like the New York Times," and then it's like really weird because you're like, I don't know, it's just kind of bizarre because you're like, "Oh yeah, this thing I made," but you don't. It's kind of hard to see it as like see the success of it in a
Mm-hmm.
way because you're just like, well, now I'm back at home with my cat, and I'm just like making spaghetti. You're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
it's not like I'm suddenly like whisked away to like, I don't know, on a yacht or something like that. You're just like, oh yeah, just like, but it's amazing. I kind of still find it very hard to fathom. Just like even when they show you the numbers of people who like download the film on VOD and stuff like that, and you're like, that is like, it's just crazy to me that like that many people would watch the film. I like never thought that would be possible.
Have you have you had to like, deal with any feelings, I suppose, of like imposter syndrome, or just I guess general anxiety around that? Because it's funny the way your mind works. I think your whole life builds up to this, and you're like, this is what I want to do, this is what I want, this is what I want to achieve, blah blah blah. And then like you start to do it then, and I always hear stories of people being like, my anxiety was through the roof, I like the nerves were crazy, I felt a little bit like an imposter. um did you have any of that? And if so, like how did you kind of, I suppose, push that to the back of your mind so it didn't ruin things for you?
Yeah, it was weird. It was like I definitely feel imposter syndrome. I think I have that big time with anything, even when, because having a feature film like a horror feature, I think particularly like in the US, that if it does well, you then have access and meetings with people that like you kind of
Yeah.
never thought you would. Like I got an email from Bill Hader saying that he loved the film and stuff like that. So you're like, but you kind of like the imposter syndrome is so strong. You're like, this must be a prank. This is
Yeah.
surely not real. Because you're just like, I'm from a very kind of like modest upbringing, North Dublin, where like Hollywood is kind of like off in a different world. And like, so I never, you kind of just are like, this is so crazy. So yeah, I've serious imposter syndrome. I think the anxiety is definitely real. I had it more when the film first was like at TIFF, and then we were kind of, at other festivals and getting our first reviews. And
Mm-hmm.
when the film first kind of was coming out in Ireland as well, because I think just the anxiety about like, well, how will it be reviewed? Because you get some people telling you like, I loved it, and like, or you get a horror fan telling like they really liked it, but you never kind of know how it's going to go generally. I think by the time the US release was coming, we had got enough good reviews, in the UK and Ireland, and then from word of mouth kind of reviews as well, that like on Twitter and stuff like that, that when that was coming up, I felt less anxious, I think, because I kind of knew we had a base that like there was a somewhat of a consensus that people liked it and like
Yeah.
didn't hate it. So like you kind of was like, okay, I'm not going to get like totally like a 1-star review, hopefully. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's hard because as well, I think, I'm always really jealous of like filmmakers from the like 70s and 80s, because I think back then, like, the response to your film was, if you read a newspaper, you read the review and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think now like everybody has a letterboxd account or Rotten Tomatoes or even Twitter, and like, so there'd be times where like I'd be tagged in a tweet where like people would be mentioning the film, and then people would reply to the tweet with me on still on the Twitter thread being like, I hated that film, I thought it was shit, and you're just like, oh cool.
And you know what I think as well, like, would always give me anxiety, and even for other people, like, I see something like that, how and I hate, even I feel like when I say it, I'm like speaking it into existence in a way, but um I suppose this culture of like, it's people find it, I don't know, like cool or funny or whatever to just like shit on things, like I've seen that happen before with, maybe not so much with feature films and stuff, but I've seen people, bring out projects, and it seems to be like a running joke on Reddit or somewhere, and it picks up, and like this thing gets like, 1,000 1-star reviews just because. And it's just like,
Yeah, it's kind of scary because yeah, you never know how people are just gonna turn on you for whatever reason, and like, and I have such respect. I think even before the film, I didn't have such a kind of appreciation for filmmaking, like the feature film. I think really taught me like, there's so many things that kind of can go out of your control just because of budget or, COVID or like weather or like, all
yeah.
these kind of things that just like, you know, a lot of filmmakers, I think, obviously you aren't getting exactly what they had in their mind because of
Mm-hmm.
different things that happened or compromises they had to make. And I think, I think the regular folk that are kind of shitting on stuff all the time probably don't have an appreciation for that. So I think, I'm always very kind of thoughtful when I'm talking about any films now that I've seen, or like, obviously there's stuff that maybe I don't really like that much for whatever reason, but I think I would never go tweeting being like, this is so shit. Do you know what I mean? Because you're like, that's not necessary. I can like privately at home go, I didn't really like that film, but that's okay. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like
and
not a
it's
big
definitely
deal.
become certain people's and certain outlets like shtick to just kind of be like, oh, everything is shit all the time, and like, let's make it like a comedy bit. Like a movie comes out and it's like a comedy bit about how shit something is, and it's just kind of like, there's a couple of like bigger YouTube channels that I would watch, and I just it's just gotten old for me now, and you can even see like in the comments, like people are starting to like turn on them. It's just kind of like,
Yeah.
everything can't be negative all the time. Like everything can't be just like terrible and shit all the time.
Yeah, well, I think, it's sad the kind of film journalism is so important, and like actual like good film critics and good film journalists are so important to have, because I think there's a huge anybody kind of thinks they can be a film critic or a journalist, and I
Yeah,
think some people think that means finding all the things that are wrong with a film. But actually, I think good film journalism is, taking the ideas of the film and discussing them and kind of saying, like, what does this mean? And, how did they do this? And like appreciation for the craft. And I think, yeah, I think a lot of them, like, a lot of those kind of, yeah, as you say, YouTube channels or whatever it is, it's like, I don't think they have the understanding of like, no, that's not how you review a film. It's just to say, like, well, they did this shit, or like, I didn't like this about it. And it's like, well, what did you like? Like, talk about kind of the themes, or like what, all of
mm-hmm.
it's just, it's really tricky. Yeah, I think to kind of find a good balance of good film journalism these days.
It's just like that clickbaity thing. I could talk to you for 5 hours to be honest, but I have a handful of short questions before I let you go.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody like looking to follow a dream? I think, um, over here, our culture, we're probably a little bit behind, maybe even America, where they can be, you often hear like, oh, it's the land of opportunity and go get them and break a leg. And whereas I feel like the Irish culture, I think it's, and not just because I'm from Ireland, but I think it's definitely harder to do, say, what you've done coming from a place like this, because I think I don't know, our attitude is very like, now you go away now, you're not really going to be making films now, go and get a job in Pettit's or Tesco's or somewhere. And,
Yeah.
it's very like we have this weird, like, self deprecating where it's just like, no, look, you're not going to be doing that now. That's for people in, like you said, like people in Hollywood go out at.
Yeah, I think definitely there's a culture of that here. But I think the funny thing is, like, people, I've been to the LA, and like, you have meetings with people and you leave and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna get $1 million deal. I'm gonna be like offered the next like huge movie. And then you kind of never hear from them again, because
Yeah.
they've been so positive that you really think that you've kind of gotten further than you have. And I think that's a kind of, it's taught me a good balance, because I think Ireland, we go too far. We're definitely, it is a case of like, you're too big for your boots now, come on, you're not actually going to do that. And it can be very disheartening, I think, when you have a dream or you like, you want to
Yeah.
do something big. um but I think just striking a balance, because it is, I think here you do get people being like, I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. And you just go, no, I will be able to do it. But then you kind of, when you do get somebody in Ireland that goes like, I think this is going to be good, or I think you can do this, it's true. It's
Yeah.
they're not
They're not
bullshitting
getting
you
a
in a
bit.
way,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
like, yeah, so that's kind of, and I think one thing here, which I think a lot of people think that Screen Ireland is like this impenetrable, like, wall of China that you'll never like get past. And you think that it's kind of very difficult to get the funding and stuff like that. But I think we are really lucky here. Like in the States, like I've talked to lots of filmmakers who, the idea that a government funded
Mm.
film body would give you money to write a script. Like loads of people write scripts on spec over there and just hope that somebody buys it. And they don't have this kind of, art, this idea that film is art, and like you don't need to recoup all the costs all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that here we're very, very lucky in that we do have a culture that appreciates the arts and like sees it as art, and film is, something that is to be appreciated culturally, and not just like to be consumed as like make money, make money, make money.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, even with the film, like with You Are Not My Mother and any projects I have in development, Screen Ireland, they never kind of are trying to push you in a way that for the film to make the most money. They want it to be the best story that it is, and the notes are always very much based in that. So I think in the States it definitely is a feeling of like, how do you make this as sellable as possible? So I think it's striking a balance between those two things. And I think it has changed a lot here as well in the past few years about horror as a genre. I think
Mm-hmm.
like it used to be kind of a dirty word, and like it felt like nobody really wanted to make it. But I think in recent years, because it's become a bit more mainstream with the, I hate the word, the elevated horror
Mm-hmm.
thing, I think now it's seen as more of a way to like discuss certain themes in a way that like can be provocative and all
Yeah.
those kind of things. So I think, you know, I wouldn't say, I think the Irish industry has definitely changed a lot too, and there's a lot more money and there's a lot more kind of scope for what genres you're doing. So I think don't kind of give up here, even if people tell you like you shouldn't, you should get a job in like, I don't know, the bank or something.
Yeah. Okay, two final things. Where can people support you, kind of keep in touch with what you're doing? And I suppose, obviously you probably can't get too in depth, but like what does the future look like right now?
So I think obviously, well, our film, well, when we're recording this, the You're Not My Mother hasn't come out on Netflix yet, but it comes out on Netflix the 28th of May, and it'll be on UK and Irish Netflix. So you can watch the film there, and like I don't know, just like it or whatever. I don't know. How do you get things up in the Netflix algorithm? So it's like on the kind of, I don't know.
The top 10 or
That would,
whatever.
yeah, that'd be cool. If we can try and manage that, that'd be great.
I
Um,
guarantee you, right? I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I guarantee you when that movie comes out, if it's not number one, it'll be in the top 5 on Netflix. I guarantee it.
do you think?
I guarantee it.
I don't know. Horror is sometimes a hard one to like. You find it like there is a real disconnect. Like, there's some people who just don't watch horror and they won't watch it. But okay, we'll see if you're right.
Yeah,
We'll take it.
I'm
We'll
gonna
take.
message you when that comes out. A screenshot of that. I guarantee it. I don't know. I just feel like it's one of those movies that kind of has that vibe, and I think it'll fit really well into that. I think Netflix are quite good as well about like they're really good at like sectioning movies into certain, like they have like their true crime and their this and their that, and I think they're quite clever with how they push stuff.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm excited to see because, like, like Netflix is so widely viewed by I think lots of people, and particularly the horror community. Like, obviously now we have Shudder, but hopefully, yeah, it'll a kind of a larger audience that might not have seen the film yet might be able to see it there, which will be fun and cool. But yeah, other than that, then what's next in the future? God. Well, I'm gonna be later this year. I'm kind of directing some TV stuff, which I can't really mention yet, but it's like some TV directing that I'm gonna be doing. Then hopefully the next feature will be shooting at the start, kind of early 2023,
Nice.
which hopefully that will all pan out, and we're kind of figuring that out at the moment. So yeah, hopefully more horror movies in the future, and yeah, have some fun with that. But yeah, I'm from a family where it's kind of like, that thing of like, oh sure, you're not doing that kind of thing. So now I never mention anything because I have the fear of like
Yeah.
that it just won't happen, and then like you'll have to turn to like a bunch of people that you've said it to, and they'll be like, oh yeah, whatever happened with that, and you're like, oh yeah, nothing.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally know what you
Yeah.
mean. Final question before I let you go. Why horror and what does it mean to you?
Why horror? Why not horror?
Well, yeah, that's what I would say.
I think I love horror because it is a way, I think, of like dealing with some of the more harsher realities and difficult things in our world, but in a way that makes them kind of accessible and entertaining. So I think it's a very
Yeah,
cathartic way to deal with some of the scarier things in the world. And I think as well as a filmmaker, I love it because it really allows you to be creative and let your imagination run wild, and kind of you feel like a bit of a kid again because you can create monsters and you can
hmm,
just really kind of have fun in a way that other genres probably won't let you do as much. So yeah, I think, and it's important. I think it's I read an article during COVID that like horror fans had better ways to deal with their anxiety because
yeah,
like
yeah.
it
I'd say
like
that.
helps you, yeah, it like helps you kind of process your anxiety like when during COVID I watched so much horror movies all the time. I think because I was just like, the real life horror of the world is too much, but watching this, like watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is kind of soothing in a way, in a
Yeah,
weird
yeah.
way.
It's an
Yeah.
escape, and I think, and it's something that I personally only in recent years I've probably realized that I would definitely use horror as a crutch for when like I was having a shitty time. And I actually people who listen to the show now will probably be looking for this, but I recently submitted a short radio documentary to Dublin FM, and it talks all about the effects of horror on mental health and stuff like that. It's only like a little short 4 or 5 minute thing, but I appreciate you taking the time. This has been great. I'm super happy, I suppose, proud to see somebody from our country as well kind of do what you've been doing and continue to do. I hope we can reconnect again in the future. Maybe when you can. I know sometimes it's hard because there's lots of things that can't be talked about.
Yeah.
So that's why I try and stray away from asking too many questions because I can't help but try and dig.
Yeah.
Just for my own selfish reasons. But this has been fantastic. I'm delighted. I didn't actually know that the movie was coming out on Netflix. So for anyone who is listening, the links to Kate's stuff will all be down in the description wherever you're listening to the podcast. And it will be, by the time this releases next week, it will be out on Netflix in the UK and Ireland, right?
Yeah, so it's just UK and Ireland Netflix, I think. Yeah.
Okay. I'm assuming as regards to the States, it's streaming. It's probably up for rent, is it?
Yeah, so in the US you can watch it. Still, it's on like iTunes,
Yes.
Apple, like Prime, I think, and YouTube and stuff. Google Play, you can rent it there, and I think it's like $3.99 now or something like that. So you're not breaking the bank.
Yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it. All the links will be down below. Like I said, appreciate you taking the time. It's been great, and yeah, all the best.
Thanks so much. It was so nice to talk to you, and thanks for having me.